The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, joining us now on the program, we're taking a look at a new report from Rabobank looking at the rebuild of the U.S. cow herd. Joining us for a conversation, she is Animal Agriculture Sustainability Analyst at Rabo Research. Charlotte Talbot is with us here today on the show. Charlotte, thanks for the time. It's good to connect with you. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Great to be here.
Well, let's just start. I know there's been a lot of talk and a lot of folks, wondering what this rebuild of the U.S. cow herd could look like. When will it start, et cetera, et cetera. So just give us the overview of this new report, why you took a look at this research, and what are some of the things we found with this specific Rabobank report?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've heard a lot about the rebuild, the kind of speed, timing, different considerations that are going into cow-calf producers' minds about when to start rebuilding and how. And so this report really takes a look at the timing of the rebuild from a kind of a long-term stance, but also in connection to some of the growing sustainability opportunities and demands around that. So if we look at where we're at right now, we're seeing a continued tightening of cattle supplies, and we can expect that through the coming years. And so what that means at a high level is kind of a higher share of that retail dollar at the ranch level, reaching those cow-calf producers. So signaling cow-calf profitability, but there's definitely still some negative effects and some different risks in the system. We think about weather, we think about price volatility, and leading to just kind of some overall structural increased production risks. And so this report is looking at different ways where we can build resiliency into the system, better weather some of those different shocks, specifically looking at things like drought, things like the continued incentivizing of quality in our beef, and what that might mean for genetics, and then also taking a look at some innovations and technologies. So really, cow-calf producers can look at where they've been for the last 10 years, where we're going in the next 10 years, and think about investments in different areas of the operation to increase productivity and as well as efficiency.
Well, I know a few different strategies. I want to take a look at those specifically here in a second. But I think overall, you bring up sustainability and things of that nature. And some folks maybe needing to rethink how we do this upcoming herd rebuild. That's a bit of the takeaway I gathered when I was reading through things. Just it's not the typical rebuild necessarily we've seen in the past, 10, 20 years ago, et cetera. There's some different factors at play here, right, Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about the different considerations for rebuilding, sustainability is kind of as a newer one, and it's going to have a little bit more emphasis throughout this rebuild compared to our historical rebuilds. And that's really just there's a lot of drivers behind sustainability. We think about the money that's in the investment community, different corporate sustainability goals that trickle down throughout the supply chain. And so, in the near term, I see this as having a direct implication on maybe the amount of transparency that the downstream companies in the supply chain are looking for from cow-calf producers. I don't think it's necessarily going to come in the form, at least anytime soon, of direct greenhouse gas, those types of considerations for cow-calf producers, but just that need for having more information about how food was produced, and as well as, if we're thinking about packers or processors within the beef supply chain, the information that they're going to need to really build their reporting around sustainability. So I think that's where I'm looking at it coming from throughout this rebuild is what data can I have about my production system, and how can I use that to gain the maximum market opportunity?
Let's look at a couple of these strategies that was laid out in this report. And I know strategy one, looking at improving pasture and rangeland resilience. You mentioned the weather. We've had drought issues. We've had concern about just our overall pasture rangeland quality. So talk about this a little more in depth for us. What are we looking at with this first strategy?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, we just highlight three strategies, or can also be thought of as case studies, where producers can look at investing time and resources into specific things that may have more benefit at this point in the cycle. So, if we think about a lower cattle inventory and it kind of being a time to reset. Like I mentioned, looking at where we've just been in the cycle and where this next cycle is headed. And so one of those, as you mentioned, is looking at pasture and forage resources. Thinking about drought, we've had widespread drought for many years. That's been part of what slowed the rebuild and has also kind of exacerbated at the level that liquidation took place. And so in many places, we still have a lot of poor pasture conditions. We saw some recovery here at the start of the year in 2024, but we've since declined in pasture condition from a national perspective. And so looking at, before we're starting to increase our stocking rate, add cattle back on pasture, how can we address those resources, target those bare areas, look at some of those undesirable species? What is our grazing management plan, before we're adding or retaining more heifers? And then inevitably, that becomes a risk management tool for future times of drought, more resilient pasture resources. Pasture is the cheapest way to maintain a cow. So that's kind of where we're looking at with that strategy.
How about strategy number two? Talking about, and you kind of mentioned this in the open, looking at herd genetics and things of that nature. Talk about just looking at herd genetics, monitoring, enhancing these genetics, etc. What's behind strategy number two?
Absolutely. Thinking about the timing piece again, we've got, fewer cattle out on pasture. We're younger cattle out on pasture from a national perspective. And we're thinking about those heifers that we want to retain. So which of those heifers is going to be the highest quality? And then I think a big piece of that as well is looking at how to monitor genetics. There's something called, and it's mentioned in the report, the Task Force for Genetic Merit within our beef animals, and so that's actually looking at how genetic information can be passed through points of sale, where cow-calf producers can actually gain the value from the genetics that they are placing in that herd. It all starts with the cow-calf producer. They're making those breeding decisions, and so how can we maximize the market opportunity for each animal at sale? And then, of course, that tells it's a big part of the sustainability story. Genetics has a very high potential to increase sustainability of the overall ranch. And so that's kind of where that genetics piece is getting at, looking at ways to enhance the genetics of each individual animal, as well as capitalize on that added value that will inevitably be felt at harvest.
I know you mentioned this as well, but the third strategy, we can just lean in here again real quick, looking at
Mhm.
sustainability incentives and some of the different emerging innovations. That's the third strategy in the report, right, Charlotte?
Yep, Jesse. The third strategy is really looking at the combination of new innovations and new technologies that are becoming more accessible to producers, in conjunction with this kind of trend towards new opportunities, financial and technical resource for climate smart commodities. We think about USDA's partnerships for climate smart commodities, some of the boosted funding with NRCS programs, and how we can couple those. And so, I think about innovations and technologies being improved record keeping, farm management for efficiency, looking at the operation and maximizing every piece of it. And, that can be kind of boosted by some of these other programs and financial incentives that are out there, where producers can really, again, be able to identify those places where they may have untapped market opportunity.
Well, as we wrap up our conversation and just take a look at this whole report in general, any final thoughts you'd share with us, Charlotte, just as folks are taking a look at this, rethinking and looking at how we're going to do this cow herd rebuild and more? What would you leave folks with today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would leave folks with just the idea of investing in this rebuild and what that means. Traditionally, the cattle industry is I think one of my colleagues often mentions it's the built to last mindset. And so, as we're thinking about new investments into the future, how can we kind of look at an investment cycle where we're having less risk, smaller investments that hit really hard on that efficiency and productivity piece that increases the resiliency of the operation. And so kind of this trial and error mindset with all of these strategies, finding what works for each individual operation because they're all different, and then really telling the story. And I think telling the story comes from the different market opportunities, the different new sale pathways that you can find to tap in and kind of tell the story of your goals and how you've invested in them.
Well, I know folks can take a look at the report. They sign up for an account, robobank.com, under the knowledge section. They can find more details on the report. Productivity and efficiency will power the next U.S. cow herd rebuild. Author of the report, Charlotte Talbot, animal agriculture sustainability analyst with Robo Research. Charlotte, thanks so much for joining us on the show today, and we'll look forward to getting you back on in the future.
Thanks, Jesse. Great to be here.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. There, you can watch our latest interviews with the top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. Just go to youtube.com/markettalkag and hit the subscribe button, or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.